Welcome back. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the High Renaissance and Mannerism in Northern Europe and in Spain. So, again, we've been here before. Uh, we have been in Italy. Now we're traveling north into the Holy Roman Empire and Spain. We're going to see it to be drastically different. This is a time, and I say this almost every chapter, that this is a time of immense change within social, political, economic kind of areas, but nothing is going to prepare the people of Europe for the change that is about to happen in the year 1450. And in order to do that, let's take a step back in time a little bit. And we were looking at the invention, or at least Johannes Gutenberg's adaptation of the Chinese print press that had been around for at least 1,500 years prior to Gutenberg getting a hold of it. But in 1450, he invents or reinvents this idea of, or perfects, let's say, revolutionizes the idea of movable type, movable text print. Up until this point, the primary mode of communication was printmaking. And printmaking is the art of multiples. Within a block or a plate, you can create multiple images. We looked at that in a previous chapter, so please go back and review that. There's a video on woodblock printmaking. But this is the oldest form. Again, it's kind of like a rubber stamp where you carve out of the wood, place ink on it, and then paper and smash it together, so on and so forth. These are low relief, if you remember us talking about that. And again, we've discussed this with Gutenberg in previous chapters. But essentially, he repurposed a wine press and turned this into a print operation with movable type. And what that means is that these little characters could then be, manipulated, moved, removed. Spelling, of course, was a thing. They didn't have spell check then. But you could easily make and remake text, images, prints very, very, very quickly, very efficiently. And to this point, we've looked at this when we were looking at illuminated manuscripts. Books were extremely expensive, and they were all made by hand. They were all hand drawn. Sometimes they would take weeks, months, and even years in order to produce or reproduce copies of a book, and they were extremely expensive. And remember, when we were looking at those, the Limburg brothers in particular, we were looking at illuminated manuscripts, that these were printed on vellum, which is very finely, thin, stretched animal skins. And then paper kind of comes in again with Gutenberg and his press in the late 1400s. But what this also meant was, because books were so expensive and because they were very difficult to reproduce, it meant the literacy rates were extremely low. Most people couldn't read. They couldn't afford books anyways, but they certainly couldn't read. And what this ended up kind of as a byproduct, or just kind of a natural consequences of the illiteracy rates, is that really the church or people who were in extreme positions of power, wealth, status, they were able to read. Mostly this meant the church, meaning that the church can then manipulate and control the narrative, right? Because sometimes in order to hear the news of the day, you had to wait for the painting to come out, or you had to wait for the book to be made about it and read about it. And that could take decades. That could take years in order for this thing to be reproduced or just produced, period. So it was extremely easy for social control But after the press, the literacy rates skyrocketed, because information could be spread faster, and they didn't have to wait for the book to be written or to hand copies to be made. So, um, and there's pros and cons to this, because the fact that people could produce information and news so quickly, where we start to see the first kind of instances of social awareness and social change come about. Now, the cons to this, of course, is that people with the money and with the resources and access to these things, they can also spread misinformation and false information way more efficiently and quickly, because they could spend all this types of all the money and the resources and the wealth that they possess and the power that they command and yield over people who are less privileged and have either no or very little literacy rates. And this is where we talked a little bit about in the High Renaissance, looking at stained glass windows and rose windows, often depicting imagery of the Stations of the Cross, or images of people donating to the church. Because people couldn't read, they would look at the images and they would kind of see how they were supposed to act, and they would be able to just understand and assume that that's what their normal expectations were. Of course, one of the first things that Johannes Gutenberg did reproduce was his Bibles, of course, the Gutenberg Bibles, amongst other ones, but those were the primary texts that he was focusing on disseminating at the time. So this is really the beginning of the modern world. With the written word and with these things printed, all of a sudden we start to see groups of people, like-minded people, kind of pocket together. Again, before, you didn't have this information, you didn't have access to information or the news, so you would hear about these things afterwards, and you weren't really never sure about your neighbors or people in your area, so on and so forth. But now, with this type of invention or this type of information being disseminated out, you could find like-minded individuals. You could find community members, communities who were like-minded or who shared thoughts and shared kind of ideologies. And there became, again, this newfound sense of social awareness and social connectedness. And this leads us into one of the most seminal movements that happened in this time frame. 1517, we have a monk by the name of Martin Luther, who is upset and disgruntled with the Catholic Church. And mostly he is upset with the church, with what he calls the selling of indulgences. The selling of indulgences would be like the church would forgive people of their sins and allow them to atone and to kind of admonish their sins if those specific practitioners or sinners would donate X amount of dollars to the church, and that would be kind of dictated by the pastor, the cardinal, the priest, whatever clergy service was kind of in charge of the church or in the area. So you could pay your way into heaven, and if you had the ability to pay, you could do X, Y, Z, and then just pay a small fee. Maybe that would go into the church's coffers, maybe that would go into the bishop's coffers, bishop's pockets, so on and so forth. But either way, Martin Luther cited 95 indulgences or 95 grievances that the Catholic Church where the Catholic Church went against the Bible. And he most famously had these printed, these 95, or what we call Martin Luther's 95 Theses, and famously nailed the 95 Theses of indulgences to the door of the local church. And this eventually led him to be excommunicated and kicked out of the Catholic Church. It took a few years, but remember Pope Leo X? Remember we talked about him? Leo X, was Pope Julius II's successor, right, in the rebuilding of Rome. Well, people who dissented against the Catholic Church were frowned upon, go figure. And Martin Luther was extremely frowned upon. It took him a few years, but eventually he was removed from the Catholic Church. And he was stripped of any privileges that the Catholic Church may hold. And he started his own Protestant movement, the Protestant, because he was really just trying to originally, he wasn't saying anything. It wasn't that he was didn't want to be a part of the church. He was just saying that this is where the Catholic Church, 95 instances where the Catholic Church went against the Bible. So essentially he was looking to just reform the church, hence the Protestant Reformation. He was just trying to reform, but because the dissent came against the Pope Leo X, in 1521 he was kicked out, and he started the Protestant Reformation, or the Protestant movement, this Protestant sect. This caused wars. This was mass chaos. This is far more devastating to the social, political, economic fabric than even the Great Schism or the Black Death. This was complete pandemonium and chaos. Europe was ripped apart. There were numerous and countless wars. This caused countries and city-states to break up. This caused families to break up. It was just complete social, political, and economic upheaval. Essentially, and just to understand, when we get, or at some point, we will talk about this idea of what Martin Luther was trying to say. And essentially, and we also have this idea of like Marxist art theory. Now, this is like fast forwarding a lot, right, from the time frame of the 15th century where we're at currently, the 15th and the 16th centuries. But essentially, they fall into the similar kind of frame of, or school of thought, is that Martin Luther said, listen, I can read the Bible by myself. You don't need to interpret the Bible for me, which is Catholicism. People would come in, the priest would deliver their sermon, deliver their lessons or their moral teachings of the Bible, and that was that. There was no ability to question. Here, Luther is saying, like, you, by interpreting the Bible for me and now not allowing me to learn how to read this for myself, you are interfering with my personal relationship with God. God doesn't need to go through you to get to me. I can read the Bible. If this truly is God's word, and this is truly the great law, then I can read this Bible by myself, have my own personal understanding of it, and therefore have my own personal relationship with God. And that does not involve the church. We don't need to go to a specific place in order to worship or be reverent of God. God is everywhere. Creation is everywhere. So all we need to do is be moralistically good people, and we can maintain that relationship with God ourselves. We don't need the church. So you can see how this just ripped apart everything that was going on in Europe. And this isn't to say that, like, there's obviously now there's Catholics and Protestants in Europe, but eventually this whole idea leads to the breaking up of the Protestant movement. So we have the Lutherans, of course, the original, the OG, right? But then we're going to see like the advent of Calvinists and Baptists and Methodists, right? These are all variations or like splinter sects off of the original Lutheranism, or this, Protestant Reformation kind of break. So we need to kind of look at that, right, as a way to like kind of put us into context of where we're at. So here's a wood print. I'm going to show you some various things. So this is a woodcut showing kind of typical imagery that's going on right now. Yes, it's prior to Johannes Gutenberg, of course, or excuse me, at least it's not. It's not prior to it. My mistake. Let me state this again. Um, we're looking at the Protestant Reformation, but this is still a woodcut. So on the left, we see this kind of split, and what we're looking at is kind of this idea that on the left is like the Catholic way of doing things, and on the right is the Protestant way. And we see from the Catholics this punitive God, where we have, of course, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and Adam and Eve. We see the muses here with the Ten Commandments. We see the devils coming out of the forest, right? We see the flames of hell and damnation. So this is very much a punitive kind of ideology meant to kind of scare people away from Catholicism. And if we look to the right panel in this diptych, right, diptych, we see a much more graceful God, loving God. Only through God's salvation will we be able to ascend into heaven. So it is this. There's definitely these things going on in Europe at the time. So this is what some of the imagery that we're looking at that is splitting these families and communities and countries and city-states away from the Catholic Church and into the Protestant movement. And it is going to be more prevalent when we get into Northern Europe, because this is where that Protestant kind of Reformation and the Protestant movement is happening. Again, we looked at Northern Europe, European paintings. We are still looking we're still looking at the idea of realism. We are looking at this idea of everyday life. Remember, we're in Italy. We have this idea that we need to show. Well, it's a humanist, right? So it's very self-centered. It is the idea of disegno. Remember, we talked about these. Disegno is the stimulation of the intellect, whereas in colorido is the other one, is the stimulation of the senses. In Northern Europe, we have again the idea that we are looking at everyday life. We are looking at rational things. We are looking at realism, right? A hyper focus on detail, right? And showing things how they are. We also see people like Jan van Eyck, remember, who is using iconography in his work in order to depict kind of narratives and stories. And we saw a few of these with the Arnolfini wedding portrait. We've seen, Primavera. We've seen all of these types of images before, or paintings that have iconography in them. But instead of that dreamlike or ideal perfectionism in man, we're seeing the true realistic kind of side of life here again in Northern Europe. So we'll talk about the Holy Roman Empire. It's not so much an empire as it is just kind of a falling apart of the Duchy of Burgundy, right? The Burgundians fall, Burgundy falls, and all of these provinces and all of these areas kind of homogenize into this area that we call Germany, kind of this place. But they call it, there's not so much an empire, maybe as a collective, but we call it the Holy Roman Empire. They have a different feel than Italy, right? Northern art has a different feel than Italian art, and we're going to start seeing that in the images that we're seeing on the right here from Matthias Grunwald. This is another altarpiece of sorts. Northern Europeans are focused on the frailty of the human body, whereas in Italians we're the perfection of the human body. If you remember people like Da Vinci with the Vitruvian Man, right? These are the absolute epitome of what humans are supposed to be. We're looking at Michelangelo and his statue of the David, right? The thinking man's David, the contemplative, calm, mature, intellectual David, prior to the battle where he slays Goliath. We're not going to see that here. We are focusing on now realistic applications of the human body. We're going to start seeing frailty. We're going to start seeing imperfections in human bodies. We're going to start seeing sinfulness. We're going to start seeing these attributes of humanity that the Italians are very much aware of, but they're trying to hold themselves to an ideal. We're going to see a lot more ideas of grotesqueness. We could modernly look at it through this idea of, or this lens of the abject, kind of this idea of, well, the theory of the abject is kind of this idea of going through like a car accident, driving past the accident and looking and saying, God, I hope I don't see a dead body, but I kind of hope I see a dead body, right? That is to be abject, abject terror. It's something that is compulsive to look at. It's compulsive to be engaged with. You can't look away. Francis Bacon would be another contemporary painter that we could talk about with this idea of the abstract, the abject. But it starts here, and maybe not starts, but definitely comes into its own within Northern European and Spanish Mannerism. So let's take a look at the Eisenheim altarpiece a little closer. And get me out of the way. So this was painted for the Hospital of St. Anthony. The hospitals at the time aren't what we think of hospitals now. Hospitals now is when we think about when we're sick, we go to a hospital, they fix us. It's a place of medicine and healing, and then we get to leave the hospital if we're lucky. Back then, hospitals were only for the people who were going to die. And St. Anthony's church was St. Anthony's hospital, not church, hospital was meant for people with skin diseases. So this particular altarpiece with Jesus was made to help the sick in the hospital, to kind of have an empathy, or to show an empathy or sympathy, right? It kind of the idea of what the tragic happenings of Jesus makes the people who have skin diseases who are going to die maybe feel a little better about themselves. But let's take a look at some details. Remember, this is what Northern Europeans really are focusing on. Jesus is made and depicted as if he has the skin disease. We can see, Mannerism is this idea of these elongated bodies, kind of gangly forms. They're not realistic at all. They're accentuated and exaggerated for effect. We see Jesus's skin looks like it's pockmarked with a disease. Again, St. Anthony's Hospital is a hospital for people with skin diseases. So we can very much see that. We see the wound and the graphic nature of the blood spilling out. We see where his hands are contorting, where the nails are driven through, and his feet, where his flesh is ripped. We see the effects of dehydration, and the skin kind of like pulling away from the mouth and the drool. It's extremely graphic and grotesque. It's this obsession with detail. It's humanism, it's realism versus humanism. This is the altarpiece while it's open, and we see these golden saints, very much in this late Gothic Byzantine artwork kind of style. I know that we said by this time in Italy they've moved past this, but this is in Northern Europe, and they're still kind of hanging on to these Byzantine kind of styles, forms and styles and motifs. So we see this still a little bit in the early Europe. If we look to the panel on the right, this is the torturing of Saint Anthony by demons, and basically again through Christ's sacrifice and salvation wow, sorry, I'm not going to edit this out. Through Christ's salvation, damn it. Take 3. Through Christ's sacrifice will we only find salvation. That's what's going on here. So by seeing this panel to the right of Saint Anthony being tortured by demons, and then we see Saint Anthony sitting on the throne of sainthood. So too can you become godlike and saint-like, right, through these messages. Okay, so unlike Italy with their Ninja Turtles, the Holy Roman Empire does not have Ninja Turtles. But what they do have more than makes up for it. They have a guy by the name of Albrecht Dürer. And Albrecht Dürer is kind of like the Leonardo of the North. He traveled widely through Europe. He became an international superstar. He became an international celebrity. He took trips to Italy, and he studied the Renaissance artists. He studied his contemporaries. He studied people like Leonardo. And he was the first northern painter or northern artist to kind of synthesize the aesthetics of Northern Europe with intricate detail, the realistic rendering of objects, iconography, or like the idea of hidden symbols and meanings within paintings, and he blended them with the classical body types and linear perspectives that we see in the Italian artists of the time. And he was hugely influenced by Leonardo. Now, why I say he was Leonardo of the North is not just because he liked him. Albrecht Dürer studied as a metalsmith. He was a painter. He was a printmaker. He was a naturalist. He was an engraver. And he did, although he was a graphic designer, and although he was a famous painter, he was more famous for his engravings than his paintings, and for his prints. And as a matter of fact, he was the first artist to sue for copyright of his work, because the way the print press worked, and these remember we looked at these print processes called Italio. Italio is the printing where instead of a wood block print, they are carving the design into metal plates, inking it, and the ink goes into those grooves, and then the paper comes down, you press it on, the ink comes out, and wham, you have an image. Well, it was very easy to get a hold of those types of prints and presses, prints and plates to reproduce works. Remember we talked about Raphael, and he was, one of the first Italian artists to use the intaglio print process to make prints of his work. So this is one reason why he became and how he became so internationally famous. Same thing with Albrecht Dürer here. And it was also, I want to note that he was an extreme supporter of Martin Luther. He was a Lutheran or a Protestant. So this was something that was extremely important to him in his artwork. And you can, right, we'll be able to look at that in a few slides. He originally trained as a goldsmith under his father, but then decided that there were other interests in his life that he found better. In 1482, he begins his apprenticeship with a printmaker. And then he became famous for his printmaking, and not so much, like I said, his paintings. And in 1506, he sues an Italian artist for copying his prints. And we can see, and I'll show you a few of his works. This is a watercolor. This is a great piece of turf. But look at the Northern Renaissance realism and focus on detail. There are several different types of species of plants here, and you can identify all of them. If this were an Italian, a Northern Italian painting, it would just kind of be it would be colorido, right? It would be a stimulation of the senses. It's going to be kind of what the plants feel like. It is going to be how they aren't so much detailed on the plants and the grass as it is the subject matter. But here, the details of the individual leaves and plants are what matters here. So extremely important. But this again, Durer is this hybridization of Northern Europe and Italian Renaissance artists. Here is an intaglio engraving. Move me out of the way. Sorry, I think I'm going to be ping-ponging the way I made my slides today. Okay, so we see the modeling. This is where he is like blending the two. So we can definitely see some influences of Michelangelo, yeah, in the buffness of the bodies. But what we don't see are genitalia, right? Because in Northern Europe, the human body is sinful. It is something to be ashamed of. So we see modesty within the Protestants of Northern Europe. But so we are going to see these things displayed much differently. So another thing that we see is, but it's very much Renaissance, is that we see artist signatures starting to come into much more common practice. So Albrecht Dürer, and we'll see initials, and we'll see a couple different plates. But the modeling. So this is all engraving. This is all the intaglio engraving. So all of this shading in chiaroscuro that we talked about, this is achieved by what is called hatch marks. And these are really small, fine lines that either diagonal or that go into a crisscross cross-hatching pattern to show modeling and depth. So this is an extremely laborious process, extremely detailed. Again, iconography. We see a cat and a mouse. We've looked at this before with the Annunciation. Right. There's a few different paintings that we looked at. A few different artworks that showed the Annunciation of Christ, or the Annunciation of Mary, the Virgin, about the coming of Christ. And in one of the paintings, we looked at a panel of an altarpiece where we see Joseph making mouse traps. And we see kind of a repeat of that here, where we have the mouse meaning Satan and the cat being Christ or God, the mouse catcher. So we still are seeing the same type of iconography and the same type of imagery. It's just slightly different than what we've seen before. Oops. Here's another print. This is the Night, Death, and the Devil. And we're going to also, we talked about this at a few other lectures about these things called memento moris. And we're going to look at a lot more in Northern Europe than we do in Italy. But memento moris we'll get to. But we see these reminders all the time. The fact that we see death faces, we see Satan, we see demons, we see these creatures, otherworldly creatures that kind of have this demented look, right? These are all things to signify, right, our mortality. Maybe it's these elongated forms, emaciated forms, people that look skinny and gaunt, and like their skin is just kind of hanging on their bones. These are all meant to signify the same types of things. We see his autograph right down there, right, his initials. But we also see the modeling of the Renaissance. Again, Dürer is blending these two. We somewhat see a triangular pattern here. But you'll also notice that like everything in Northern Europe is still kind of very stacked on each other. Even though they have a sense of depth and a sense of dimension, you'll often see the image is just kind of layered on top of each other. So it's there's a maybe one could describe a lack of focus to the work itself. I don't necessarily know if it's a lack of focus. Maybe it's a lack of focal point. Maybe it's about the bigger message altogether. I don't know. I believe this is the last print from Durer that we're going to look at. This is called Melancholia 1. So yeah, this is a belief that all artists are born under the sign of Saturn, right? Which kind of lends to us being, I don't know, often in a state of frenzy, manic, depressive states, bipolar, you know, the extreme ups and downs. But essentially, like I said, there are three types of melancholia, and artists had melancholia one, and that is the artistic melancholia. And I could spend, there's a few images in this particular chapter that are quite literally entire courses of study and degrees at different art schools, or entire classes, uh, spending 16 weeks talking about one painting. This is definitely one of the engravings that could be in that category. So we see a lot of things with the icons, but we see most assuredly the name Melancholia, one, being flown in by a bat. Bats, rats, mice, all the same thing. It's Satan. This is Satan's tool in order to corrupt you, is this idea of melancholy, depression. We see a lot of different things going on. We see this idea of the angel with a compass, and we're going to see a couple different images today with some trappings of technology. We see a cherub. We see, this idea of the sands of time, a scale, a weight, the bell, this idea of a calendar system. But then we see this unusual boulder here, and this square, the square, this sphere, this circle, this round object. And then we see a dog. And we talked about the idea of dogs and loyalty and fidelity. But here's a dog that is not sleeping, but just laying down, but extremely gaunt and emaciated. So maybe kind of the idea that, you're sacrificing yourself for the art. You're loyal to art. Artists are loyal to art to the death. It's a compulsion. It's something that we need to do. It's something that we have to do. We don't have a choice in making art. We have to do it. In other words, we will die. And I will die regardless. I will be a starving artist. I will be an artist no matter what. And I think that's kind of what's going on here, is being a slave to art, being, something that is absolutely loyal to shape and form, realism, right? So I think that that's kind of what we're looking at here. I think at the time, this would probably have been very readily understood and read by not only artists, but people who were in the know. Oh, I lied. Here's another one by Albrecht Dürer. So, do I have any more? Oh, no. Okay, cool. Whatever. I told you I'm not editing this. This is live and on the fly. So, here's something that we never talked about, or maybe we did with the Jan van Eyck Man in a Red Turban, where if you were an art, you just didn't paint. I mean, Jan van Eyck did, because it's Jan van Eyck and he can do what he wants. But generally speaking, you didn't just paint paintings. You just didn't do it for fun. This he painted without a commission in hopes that somebody would buy it. He just did it. he ended up presenting it to the city fathers of Nuremberg, who did purchase it. Um, and it is currently hanging in City Hall there. So this is depicting this split between the Protestant and the Catholic Church, the Protestant movement and the Catholic Church. We see John the Evangelist on the left panel. We see John the Evangelist and Peter, the first pope, and we always know it's Peter because of this giant big ass key. Remember that Jesus handing over the keys to Peter, right? So this is how we know that Peter is this individual is Peter, because of his key. On the right, it is Mark and Paul, of course. But if you look at, this is interesting, the way that the feet are placed. John lives by the Bible, right? Where their feet are aligned. This also kind of goes back to that Byzantine thing, looking at like the court of Theodora or the court of Justinian, looking at those mosaics of the early medieval art where people's feet are in place to show importance and power. Of course, the Pope being the most powerful person in the world and the conduit to God. What John the Evangelist is saying is the word of God is before the priest and before the Pope. So that is why he is shown depicting a head of the church, meaning this is very much a Protestant or Protestant artwork, because he is saying that he is showing support for Martin Luther and putting himself, or putting the word, as it reads in John chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning there was the word. Had nothing to do with the Pope, had nothing to do with the church. They weren't there in the beginning. All it was the word of God. And that is, if you were to take that literally and put that into the Bible, that is why the Protestants, in their mind or in their worldview, is they were correct, because this is their interpretation. Again, we see modeling, we see chiaroscuro, we see red and blue. So these are huge markers of Italian Renaissance paintings. We can tell, we don't need to know that John the Evangelist is buff underneath his clothes, because we can see that. There's a grace and a dignity to them. There is this rational idea of what is going on in the Italian Renaissance to what is happening in the Northern European paintings. But I love all of this fabric. It is not as smooth and flowy and as intricate, but it is definitely still has the modeling that we see in Italy. Okay. So in 1477, we see the demise of the Burgundians. The Burgundians lose power. They lose money. They lose everything, and they get swallowed up by the Holy Roman Empire. Again, it's kind of like 17 different provinces or 17 different states kind of thing. And Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, all of these things, they kind of coalesce into the Holy Roman Empire. And for the second half of the 16th century, we see that the Holy Roman Empire is controlled by Philip II, which is the King of Spain. And Spain will influence, or these two kind of areas will influence each other, and we're going to see a lot more Spanish Mannerism in subsequent chapters, but we're definitely going to get to it in here, and we're going to start seeing some of the effects of the Spanish in Northern Europe. Okay, so I kind of want to move these out of the way. Sorry for let's put them over here. Hopefully, you'll be able to see me. Although I'd rather, more important that you can hear what I'm saying. It's more important to me that you can hear what I'm saying and see the images rather than seeing me on this little thing. Okay, so let's take a look at another one. This is Hans, sorry, Hans Baldwin Green. His name is just Hans Baldwin. He was a pupil of Albrecht Dürer, and his favorite color was green. And he was given the nickname of Green because of his favorite color, green. And they had to have because they were both named Hans, they had to have a way of delineating. So there are two Hans in Dürer's workshop, so one was green. Okay, getting back to the memento moris, let's take a look at the image on the right. This is the 3 ages of women and death. Okay, so we're also going to see memento moris in the next chapters. We're going to see memento moris and what are called vanitas, vanity paintings, really come into fruition. But this is definitely an early vanitas, or like I said, memento mori. Memento mori is a thing itself, as in death, a skull, anything that rotten fruit, dead flowers, and we're going to look at these in vanitas, and I think we already did very briefly. Right, things that show the impermanence. That's what we're talking about. So here we are definitely looking at vanity, because this young, beautiful woman who's staring at a likeness of herself, or staring in the mirror, admiring her beauty. We can see the multiple stages. We can see that she's an infant being shrouded by innocence here. Right? And then we see the old woman in the back who's trying to stave away death. And we know this is death because this is often what, again, we see skulls, emaciated forms, skin looking as if it's dangling off of the bone. It's very Halloween in nature. But look what death is holding above the beautiful woman's head. It's an hourglass, right? Time is running out. Look in the mirror all you want. Be prideful of your, of your looks and all of the things, but know that it comes to an end. You have to pay a price eventually. This is Northern Europe. Okay, this is Mannerism. If we look at the left image, another Hans Baldwin Green. This is The Witch's Sabbath. This is a chiaroscuro woodcut. It's a little bit more crude than the intaglio, right? The intaglio, again, being the metal carved or metal engraved or etched. This is another wood block print, but again, it kind of shows the idea that it's rough hewn. They're witches. They're showing we do see nudity in this one, but that is to really show their lack of modesty and their in league with Satan, their sinfulness. Right? This is the idea that we're going with here. But we see again all of this kind of stuff stacked on each other. There isn't one specific focal point. It's all just a menagerie of information and in images kind of all in the frame itself. So kind of keep that in mind as well. That there's no like one way to describe Northern Europeans in their art production. Okay. Again, I could spend an entire 16 weeks just on Hieronymus Bosch himself. If anybody's ever seen this, it's probably one of his most famous paintings. This is the Garden of Earthly Delights. This is also an altarpiece. Oh boy. Well, yeah, I don't necessarily know how to describe this other than it is surreal and full of weird shit. That's it. So Hieronymus Bosch never left his hometown. He had a very skewed idea of Christianity, very skewed idea of religion. and he painted, well, it's a very surreal ideology and kind of idealizing, um, if what would have happened had Adam and Eve not been expelled from the Garden of Eden. That's kind of what's going on here. We see in the far left panel, we see God with Adam and Eve. And we see some really bizarre things going on, but this is the Garden of Eden prior to expulsion. The middle panel is as if Adam and Eve never were expelled, and we were allowed to indulge in our humanity, in our human nature. It is full of raw sexual fantasies. It is full of raw sensualness. It is, well, we'll look at some images in a bit, but this is as if what the Garden of Earthly Delights is. This is humans taking our innermost cravings to the extreme. And on the far right panel is hell. This is the abominations of the flesh. And this is the judgment of those indulgences, or those the earthly delights that we engage in willingly and to an abundant excess, if that makes sense. So here's some close-up stills. There are, in the left panel, again, we see some very bizarre, unusual creatures. A dog that walks on two legs kind of thing. This sort of looks like a giraffe, but an albino with these weird dragon-like horns. Again, we see an image of cats and mice. We see that quite a bit, actually. The middle panel, we see this, again, overindulgence in raw sexual appetite. We see forms of bestiality. We see incest. We see all sorts of raw sexual fantasies. We see also people of different colors, different backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds. We see all sorts of sexual and perverted acts, or acts of perversion. We see things about religious concepts. And then again, on the far right panel, we see hell. And it is a weird idea of torment. Again, the abomination of the flesh. We see this weird tree-like figure with people being tortured on the inside. We see this very odd bird-like man swallowing people. Birds are coming out of people's butts everywhere. There are things being stuck into people's asses, and there's things coming out of people's asses. Meanwhile, there are ears with knives that are chopping people in half. This bird guy is eating things and then pooping them out. They have all sorts of weird, surreal, just kind of, I have no idea. And largely speaking, contemporary art historians, we really don't have an idea of what Bosch is trying to say with a lot of this imagery either. It is very bizarre. But if this does look somewhat familiar to you, I will tell you that, again, we're in Spain. So who's going to come later that's in the Spanish Mannerism? But he's from Spain. It's Salvador Dali. And Dali, with this idea of surrealism, is taking Bosch to the next level. So we're not done with Bosch yet, but we're going to see him recycled and repackaged in somebody that like Salvador Dali. So this is Peter Artisan. Again, Northern Europe is all about realism, realism over humanism. So very graphic. It's very unsettling painting, actually. To see an open market with raw meat, the ribs, the casings of sausage, right, the lungs, pigs' heads, dead animals. This is just kind of an everyday scene. This idea of milk or buttermilk here. It's it's just an everyday life scene that is very, very unsettling. We see people in the background with people who are on horseback giving, alms or giving aid to people, giving food, those types of things, charity. This is more Northern European, this the realism, lack of humor. But at the same time, I'm going to show you some things that have some humorous twists to it as well. Okay, so here is this particular artist by Albrecht Altefer. Was commissioned by the Duke of Bavaria, Wilhelm IV, and it's for his commencement of the campaign of invading Ottoman Empire, the Turks, right? However, it is painted depicting Alexander the Great, right? The Greek ruler, Mesopotamia, his war, or I guess win, in the war of King Darius III of Persia in like 333 BCE. He is heralding himself as if he is a humanist. Again, we are still taking these ideologies of Northern Europe and the Italian Renaissance and blending together. And Albrecht Dürer was certainly not the only person to do this, although he was probably the most famous person to do it. He's not the only person that is doing it. So we definitely see this Greco-Roman Mesopotamian battle scene of Alexander the Great's defeat of King Darius III. And even so, this sign up here is kind of denouncing the shame of Darius and his loss from the Duke of Bavaria. This is what it says. Alexander the Great defeated the last Darius after 100,000 infantry and more than 10,000 cavalrymen had been killed amongst the ranks of the Persians, whilst King Darius was able to flee with no more than 1,000 horsemen. His mother, wife, and the children were taken prisoner. Right? So this is definitely showing or talking about his defeat. But if you look at, again, the hyper amount of detail, if we were to zoom in on this, but then we also see this weird, surreal kind of like not reality at all. It almost kind of harkens back to Da Vinci's backgrounds, right? These alien-looking worlds that really have no place on Earth, that really have no place in realism, certainly. So it's these blending of styles together, and these motifs together. Let's take a look at, another Northern European. This is Hans Holbein the Younger. This is the French ambassadors. And again, we see an extreme hyper-realism. We see attention to detail, the chiaroscuro, the modeling, the depth, we don't necessarily see a one-point or linear perspective, this idea, but it's in there, I guarantee you. So quickly, I could spend so much time on just these paintings alone, but the iconography is just so thick in here. We see the two French ambassadors, yeah, but on the left we see Jean. His name is Jean de Venteville, and then the guy on the right is George Silva. Jorge de Selva, I think, or George de Selva, something like that, something of that nature. Anyways, I don't think it's really important. It's in your book. Google it. I'm probably wrong. That's fine. You can send me emails to tell me where I'm wrong. Probably wrong a lot. Anyways, these are trappings. This is an image of iconography up to yin yang. We see trappings of modern science, modern technology, wealth, status, all of it. We see a globe, world travelers. We see compasses. We see mirrors. We see another globe. Books. Again, we've talked about books. We looked at scrolls, music, a lute. We actually see another lute down here. We see the behind the curtain. Remember the behind the curtain thing? We see a little crucifix back here, right? These are Protestants. God is there, ever present, but don't tell me, don't shove it in my face, right? We see extremely lavish, elegant furs and felts and velvets. We see these medallions. We see all the trappings of modern society, and yet we also see this. Remember the quadrifoil? Look, we were looking at the doors of from the Basilica, St. Peter's Basilica. This is the quadrifoil design. So this is still hearkening back to early medieval artwork. But we do see something that's kind of skewered here, something that looks odd. This is super cool. This is another instance of a memento mori. So this is a skull, and I believe, yes. So in this particular painting, you have to stand at a very certain angle, right? Kind of on a certain angle in juxtaposition to the painting to be able to see that image come out in a three-dimensional kind of modeling, right? With this chiaroscuro and the whole idea of depth. So the idea here is that even with all the trappings of modern society, modern technology, mathematics and music and art and world traveling and all of the things, we cannot escape death. Death might be obscured to us, but it's always ever present and is always there. It is always at our feet. It is always at our doorstep. No matter who we are, what we do, what walk of life, no matter all of the trappings, you can be ambassadors of France, but you're all still going to die. That's a real Northern European idea. Live for today, right? Be the best human that you can be, but understand that be humble because we all face death as humans. I really was just showing this one in particular to show the amount of detail, again, that the Northern Europeans are really focused on. Okay, so let's move to another artist. Not all artists in Northern Europe were serious. A lot of them are funny. They have tongue-in-cheek kind of humor. I actually really find this to be hilarious. This is like a Where's Waldo of art history paintings. It's pretty cool. There's also a link if you want to read more about this. This is hilarious. I can't begin to describe this enough because of time constraints. But if you click this link above, this will take you to a site that will kind of go over. So there are 101 proverbs in here, and the painting is called the Netherlandish Proverbs. And these are funny. There is no central point. There is no central focal point. It's just kind of, it is what it is. But if you start looking closely at it, you'll start to see some really interesting things. And these are proverbs. Proverbs are like these moralistic stories, like the blind leading the blind, right? Or don't cry over spilt milk. Don't bang your head against the wall, right? Don't shit on the world, or let the cards fall where they may. Move like your ass is on fire. We all shit out the same hole. Okie dokie. Um, so a lot of these, some of them don't exist anymore. Some of them do. Also, there's another one. Let's go back. The expression of "don't shit while you eat where you eat." So if you look at, this is the one where we all shit out the same hole. But right next to that is people fishing. Right. So these people are fishing. It's kind of fun. There's a lot of things going on in here that are really, really quite amazing. And again, a lot of these don't exist anymore or have changed and kind of have a nuance to them. But please take a look at these. These are really, really funny. Yeah, they're just, this is funny. This is great. Okay, so let's take a look at another Peter Bruegel. This is kind of making fun of Greek mythology, but this is very much Dutch mentality. This is very much Northern Europe at its finest. So this painting is The Fall of Icarus. And if we are familiar with that story, the Greek mythology story, Icarus and his father Daedalus, they are imprisoned. Daedalus is an inventor, and he invents a series or a pair of artificial wings made out of wax and feathers. And of course, Daedalus warns Icarus to not fly too close to the sun. Now, they escape being imprisoned, but Icarus, being the child, the impetuous child who doesn't listen to his elders, flies too close to the sun. The wax melts, his feathers fall, and he crashes to earth and dies. Right? Moral of the story is don't fly too close to the sun, meaning, well, there's a lot of different meanings I think you can impart with that, but the idea is listening to your elders. The idea is don't be too reckless and careless and dangerous with your own life, right? These ideas. Okay, this doesn't really seem to depict anything about Icarus, does it? Oh, wait a minute. No, there he is. He's right down there. There's Icarus. See, this is Dutch mentality. Yes. Fly too close to the sun. Yep, you're going to fall and die. But life goes on because I still have to plow the fields. I still have goats and sheep to attend to. I still have boats with trade goods that need to get delivered. We still need to survive. So, life goes on. Yeah, you should really probably pay attention and be a little bit more mindful. But you know what? Life goes on. And I find that to be an interesting kind of juxtaposition with a very kind of sly sense of humor. But again, blending of styles. This looks a little bit more like Bellini, right? The Italian painter, where we have like this broken up into foreground, middle ground, and then background. We see atmospheric perspective. We see modeling, we see linear perspective. So this is still very much, even though it is Dutch mentality, we see very much this influence of northern Italy in these works. So here's Hunters in the Snow. Now this also doesn't seem to have a focal point or a main focus or main theme. Well, I suppose, let me say one more closing thing about this. It just jumped in my mind. Had this been an Italian version of this painting, Icarus would be the front and center. He would be extremely nude, extremely buff, and falling very gracefully and dramatically out of the sky. Right? He would be. Okay. Back to Hunters in the Snow. Sorry. again, showing everyday life. This shows the hard troubles and the trials and tribulations of a harsh winter, with the fact that it looks as if the dogs are, again, emaciated. They're skinny, they're gaunt, they haven't been fed. And if you look at the hunters returning, there aren't any animals, right? It was an unsuccessful hunt. We see laborers, people going on. The sign is broken here, right? People are ice fishing or ice skating, kind of dealing with the idea of just the harsh winter. But we do see linear perspective, where this idea of the sight line comes down through the trees, allows us to see what's going on, and it seems to follow up the implied line with this angle here, these angles, and it kind of brings us right back to the sight line down the tree, and it kind of keeps us within this cycle. And that's really important, because the idea that the cycle of life continues, this circle, the cyclical nature, the circle is always going to kind of be ever present anyways. But as a way to read a painting, to kind of the monotony of life, the monotony of winter, that's what we're looking at. Okay, so for the last few slides, I want to take a look at a Spanish artist. Actually, well, let me correct that. This is El Greco, the Greek. He's a Greek artist that actually lives. Nope. Okay, he is a Greek artist that lives in Spain, and he gets the name El Greco, the Greek. But he's definitely painting in this Spanish-influenced Manneristic style. The elongated forms focus on, frail bodies, this idea of, right, emaciated forms. But we're also seeing a very similar, the Ascension. If you remember that one, that painting, this is very much in the style of the Ascension of the Virgin. However, this is the burial of Count Orgaz. Orgaz is here, right? And we can see the Pope, and we can see a cardinal laying his body to rest, and we can see that layering and stacking of bodies on the bottom. And then instead of like Titian, where it's very warm and yellow, enveloping, we don't have that, but we do have all of the saints. We do have Jesus here waiting for the ascension of Count Orgaz. Right? We see the aspect of Christianity here. And, I guess what I want to say about that is Spain is extremely Catholic. So they're not humanist like Italy. They are definitely, though, focused on the glorification of God and the sinfulness of man. That is something that we're going to see a lot of. But they are Catholic, so they aren't showing the type of Protestant imagery. They're showing much more, Catholic kind of iconography and ideologies, but they are still doing it within the Spanish Manneristic style. And if we look to the left, we see another painting of El Greco, and this is one of his only pure landscapes that he ever painted, and we're going to start seeing in Mannerism, again, instead of with the Northern European hyper focus on realism, we're going to see kind of that colorido, right, coming through here. They're not highly rendered, the buildings. They're not very detailed and focused. This definitely feels more like a Northern Italian painting. The colors are not realistic, and as a matter of fact, we have a very swooping, kind of abstract, surreal feel, very eerie-like consequences. I don't know where that came from. A very eerie-like kind of atmosphere, the way that it's rendered, the way that the Catholic Church, though in contrast, stands out behind the black background of the sky. This is almost like the, remember the painting The Tempest that we looked at. So, interesting ways that we could read some of these things. But this is a really good, I guess, cross section of El Greco. Maybe we could look at like the pockets of light within the painting here and the rendering is like his idea of maybe the reminders of God's presence over the failure of man, even at man's most darkest times, which I think this is kind of what it's signifying, unlike the Tempest, where it's right, God's angry and expels Adam and Eve. I think here, yeah, he's angry, God is angry, but the pockets of light that show through in these highlights are this God's grace and his ever-present kind of nature through the doom and gloom. And that is what I have for you for the Renaissance and Mannerism in Northern Europe and Spain. So, hope you enjoyed. We'll see you next week.